The lie of Saint Elizabeth. Even before the cancer, she was among her husband's greatest political assets. In one of the focus groups conducted by Hickman in Edwards' Senate race, voters trashed him as a pretty boy shyster, until they saw pictures of Elizabeth, 4 years his senior. "I like that he's got a fat wife," one woman said. "I thought he'd be married to a Barbie or a cheerleader." The combination of her suffering, resilience, and imperfections made her a poignant figure, but it was the illness that elevated Elizabeth to a higher plane, rendering her iconic. By July, she was shopping a book proposal on her ordeal, and by October, she'd struck a deal. No one in the Edwards political circle felt anything less than complete sympathy for Elizabeth's plight. And yet, the romance between her and the electorate struck them as ironic nonetheless, because their own relationships with her were so unpleasant. They felt like battered spouses. The nearly universal assessment among them was that there was no one on the national stage for whom the disparity between public image and private reality was vaster or more disturbing. What the world saw in Elizabeth, a valiant, determined, heroic everywoman. What the Edwards insiders saw, an abusive, intrusive, paranoid, condescending, crazy woman. With her husband, she could be intensely affectionate or brutally dismissive. At times subtly, at times blatantly. She was forever letting John know she regarded him as her intellectual inferior. The daughter of a Navy pilot, Elizabeth had lived in Japan when she was a girl and considered herself worldly. She called her spouse a hick in front of other people and derided his parents as rednecks. One time, when a friend asked if John had read a particular book, Elizabeth burst out laughing. "Oh, he doesn't read books," she said. "I'm the one who reads books." As far back as the 1998 senatorial campaign, she had been prone to irrational outbursts that perplexed and worried John's advisors. The first time Hickman witnessed this during that race, he attributed it to the strain of her being pregnant with Emma Clare and her lingering grief over Wade. But a close friend of the Edwardses from law school informed him otherwise. "She's always been this way," the friend said. "The sharp manner, the cutting comments, the sudden and inexplicable fulminations." During the 2004 race, Elizabeth badgered and berated John's advisors round the clock. She called Nick Baldick, his campaign manager, an idiot. She accused David Axelrod of lying to her and insisted he be stripped of the responsibility for making the campaign's TV ads. She would stay up late scouring the web, pulling down negative stories and blog items about her husband, forwarding them with vicious messages to the communications team. She routinely unleashed profanity-laced tirades on conference calls. "Why the fuck do you think I'd want to go sit outside of Walmart and hand out leaflets? I want to talk to persuadable voters," she snarled at the schedulers. Elizabeth's illness seemed at first to mellow her in the early months of 2005, but not for long. One day, she was on a conference call with the staffers of One America, the political action committee that was being turned into a vehicle for John's upcoming 2008 campaign. There were 40 or 50 people on the call, mostly kids in their 20s being paid next to nothing, and in some cases literally nothing. Elizabeth had been cranky throughout the call, but at the end, she asked if her and her husband's personal health care coverage had been arranged. "Not yet," she was told. "There are complications. Let's discuss it after the call." Elizabeth was having none of that. She flew into a rage. "If this isn't dealt with by tomorrow, everyone's health care at the PAC will be cut off until it's fixed," she barked. "I don't care if nobody has health care until John and I do." The health care call immediately attained wide infamy in the Edwards' political orbit. The people around them marveled at Elizabeth's callousness. This from a woman whose family had multiple houses and a net worth in the tens of millions. They marveled as well at the tight-lippedness of their operation, the loyalty to John that kept any of the stories about the other side of Elizabeth from seeing the light of day. Yet no one called her out on it, least of all her husband. When she demeaned him, he pretended not to notice. When people complained about her behavior, he brushed them off. His default reflex was to mollify her or avoid her. No one doubted that, as her condition improved, the increase in John's travel had a lot to do with steering clear of his wife. The Regency Hotel on Park Avenue in Manhattan was the preeminent clubhouse outside Washington for Democratic politicians, The Regency was Edwards' hotel of choice when he was staying in New York. One early evening in February 2006, Edwards was hanging out in the bar, having a glass of wine with one of his donors and his young traveling aide, Josh Brumberger, when a woman sitting at a nearby table with some friends recognized him, walked over and introduced herself. "My friends insist you're John Edwards," Rielle Hunter said. "I tell them no way, you're way too handsome." "No, ma'am, I'm John Edwards," the candidate replied. "No way, I don't believe you." Brumberger saw this kind of thing all the time. Women were always hitting on his boss. He and Edwards had a well-oiled system in place for dealing with these situations tactfully and politely. "He is John Edwards," Brumberger interjected, "and I'm sorry, but we're in the middle of something. Thank you." "Oh, I'm sorry," Hunter said, and retreated to her table. From the get-go, Brumberger thought that she was trouble. Everything about her screamed groupie. She looked like a hybrid of Stevie Nicks and Lucinda Williams in an outfit more suitable for a Grateful Dead concert than an evening at the Regency. A few minutes later, after Edwards departed for a dinner around the corner, Hunter came back over to Brumberger and started quizzing him on his job. "I think I can help you guys," she said, and handed him her business card. The inscription read, "Being is free. Rielle Hunter, Truth Seeker." After Hunter left, Brumberger sat there chuckling, having another glass of wine with one of his colleagues from Team Edwards who had joined him. A little while later, he looked up through the window and clocked Hunter and one of her friends cornering his boss on his way back from dinner. "Holy shit, that crazy lady just cut him off," Brumberger yelped and sprinted outside, where he broke up the scene. A few months later, without warning, Hunter was back. In a big way. "Get ready to get mic'd up," Edwards told Brumberger in June before a speech the candidate was set to deliver at the National Press Club. "We're going to have a camera operator and a documentarian traveling with us," Edwards said. "We're going to show the world what it's really like to be John Edwards." The idea was that Hunter would produce a series of web videos documenting life on the road with Edwards. Edwards told Baldick, now running his PAC, that he liked the concept, that they should do it. Baldick objected for any number of reasons, but not because he had the slightest worry that Edwards was fooling around with Hunter. That was one thing the people in the Edwards sphere never stressed over when it came to John, who they believed had long ago made the decision not to fall into that trap. And anyway, he had always seemed, well, sorta asexual, at least to his staff. The proposed budgets Hunter submitted ran into hundreds of thousands of dollars. For months, Baldick used the price tag as a reason to resist signing her contract. By then, Hunter was already a constant presence on the road with Edwards. Who needed a contract? There was history to be made. All summer long and into the fall, she traveled with him everywhere. And even Elizabeth's allies thought Hunter was legit, that Elizabeth had probably approved the project. She told him that he had the power to change the world, that the people will follow you. She told him that he could be as great a leader as Gandhi or Martin Luther King Jr. She told him, "You're so real, you just need to get your staff out of your way." She reinforced everything he already believed, told him everything he wanted to hear. Edward swooned, of course, gobbled up every word like so much pop-psych popcorn. He spent hours talking to her, listening patiently to her ideas about the state of American democracy and her advice on media strategy. She had intuitions about Chris Matthews. He ate every meal with her, sat next to her on the plane and in the car, offered to wheel her bags through airports. He told the staff to treat her like a principal. He behaved as if she were a combination of an advisor and a spouse. At the end of August, he brought Hunter over to the family's new mansion outside Chapel Hill. She spent the whole afternoon and evening exploring the place, shooting footage of his family with her video camera. His parents were there, happily answering questions about their son. His two younger children were there, too, and Rielle lingered with them, interviewing both one-on-one on camera, delighting them by showing an interest in their opinions. Elizabeth was up in Cambridge that day, dropping off their oldest daughter, Kate, at Harvard Law School. Hunter made herself at home, prowling comfortably around the big house, taking off her shoes, curling up on the sofa. She stayed for dinner with Edwards, the children's nanny, and some family intimates. For Baldick, the alarm bells had started ringing even earlier when he got a look at the first webisode produced by Hunter. It was filled with so much flirty banter and over-familiarity between her and Edwards that it made Baldick cringe. When he and his wife watched it at home in bed on Baldick's laptop, she turned to him at once and said, "Oh my God, he's fucking her." Hunter was still traveling with him everywhere, while Elizabeth had been a distant figure from the campaign for much of the fall. Her new book, Saving Graces, was a huge success, charting high on the bestseller lists. She was even more famous now, more iconic, more beloved than her husband by a mile. She appeared on Oprah and countless other TV shows, establishing a broad constituency of fans. Elizabeth had never crossed Hunter's path until the afternoon of December 30th, 2006, in Chapel Hill, at the last stop on the announcement tour for John's presidential bid, which Rielle was on hand to shoot. Elizabeth and her family were waiting at the campaign headquarters in a small room with big windows overlooking an expansive lawn below. Hundreds of people were there for the rally, milling around outside, listening to a bluegrass band. Edwards and his aides arrived straight from the airport and breezed into the room. Hunter was toting her camera, sticking like glue to Edwards, acting the way she always did, too familiar, too intimate. Always jealous of anyone, male or female, who seemed close to John, Elizabeth watched Hunter working the room. The expression on Mrs. Edwards' face said, "Who is this woman? And what is she doing here?" Icily, Elizabeth asked Hunter to back off. "Excuse me, we're trying to have some privacy," she said. As Edwards took the stage, Hunter rushed to get into position to film his speech. Elizabeth, her brother, and her sister-in-law observed Hunter's movements. Onlookers watched them engage in an animated conversation in which Elizabeth was visibly upset. When the whole wretched business eventually became public, Elizabeth would claim that her husband revealed to her the next morning that he had slept with Hunter, but that it had happened only once, and afterward he was consumed with remorse. Her first reaction, she would say, was that John should leave the race, but he convinced her that dropping out immediately after the announcement would raise suspicions that would be hard to put to rest. Whatever was actually said between them, by the next afternoon, Elizabeth was on the phone with members of Team Edwards, issuing marching orders. Hunter's contract was to end, the webisodes to be pulled from the internet, the raw video retrieved as soon as possible. "That woman is crazy. Get rid of her," Elizabeth said. And John professed agreement. "We have to get the tapes back," he told one of his aides. "She's dangerous." And with that, Rielle Hunter disappeared. But not really, and not for long. You gotta help me.